Wuthering Waves has launched in fall, and I want to talk about it. So, there has been some discussions regarding the launch state of the game, some of it praising the combat or gameplay aspect of it, and some discussing some topics that are not so in favor of the game's quality. I had the pleasure of being one of the first million users to register, as the release window was a bit earlier than what was scheduled, and from personal experience, I thought the first couple hours were pretty good, but I understand that's not everyone's experiences. So in this video, I'm gonna go over my first impressions, some pros and cons regarding the state of the game. My name is Psyche, let's get started. So I want to get something out of the way first. Most of the points I bring up may not even be relevant in the near future, as Kuro Games is doing some heavy damage control by bug fixes and compensations. There's like a patch every other day, so it's possible that as this video gets edited and released, some of it may get fixed already. Okay, let's break down the new player experience. For the record, I did not play during closed beta testing, though I heard through the grapevine that there were quite a number of bugs present, and that some were skeptical that all of them could be ironed out given launch day. Anyways, you play as the Rover, a mysterious figure that has descended upon the world. They realized that they were meant to be someone quite influential, but can't seem to remember why. You start out in the region Huanglong, meet the magistrate and find out why you've been summoned. You meet your companions Yang Yang and Shisha, and oh my god, there is a skip button. Except, why put one there if you're not gonna let players skip everything, because some story cutscenes can't be skipped. So I would say the introduction to combat was pretty good. There's quite an emphasis on dodging and swapping to the appropriate characters via the intro and outro skills. The dodge timing is generous, but I think it has to be generous since this is a gacha game, and needs to cater to a casual audience. The first couple of boss encounters actually do a good job of showcasing the smoothness of combat and the detailed character animations. The only thing I would suggest adding is a visual or audible sound cue whenever you switch characters without an outro skill, since currently the character just kind of fades in silently. I would say the combat is more similar to Tower of Fantasy than Genshin's. There's a unique attack after a dodge, aerial attacks that consume stamina, and counter moments where an enemy attack can be interrupted when there's a glowing ring. There are rotations and attack chains that can change the flow of combat, and even something called a Forte circuit that when filled can unleash a powerful attack, but it has to be filled through a unique requirement that's actually different for each character. In terms of mobility, there is a double jump, a grappling hook, a way to run up vertical surfaces that consume more stamina. And here's a nice touch. When sprinting while not in combat, your stamina doesn't drain. Tower of Fantasy does the same thing, but hey, it's there. There's also echoes that you can collect by defeating monsters in the overworld, where they give stat bonuses that essentially function as artifacts, with sets that you can mix and match for boosts, while also being able to equip one to use as an extra skill. The higher your data bank level, the rarer of echoes obtained. At a glance, the echo system does seem more grindy than Genshin's artifact system, where you need 5 slots belonging to the same set to activate the bonus, so no offset piece. You also have to use a separate tuner currency to unlock the substats themselves. We'll see how the community reacts to it overall in the coming weeks, since a fascinating thing at a game's launch is that no one is at the endgame yet, or at least not enough people, so there's no collective community sentiment on how bad or how good the ecosystem truly is. It will depend on how necessary it is to have built-up sets to tackle endgame content. If this really is as grindy as it seems right now, I can see this as a major barrier that could cause players to quit. If the challenge content is going to be in the same degree as Genshin's Spiral Abyss, then Wuthering Waves cannot have a worse system. The endgame dungeon in this game will require 3 teams at max, and since teams consist of 3 members each, you'll need to build 9 different characters as opposed to Genshin's 8. It will take a while for anyone to get used to the gameplay, like which characters are good, who to level first, how to farm for the right materials, and so on. I know when I inevitably reach the endgame and take a look back at this footage, I would really question why I had trouble clearing world bosses. I'm sure a lot of players struggled with Genshin's Dwellin at first too, but then came back to absolutely sweep him later on. Let's talk about the story. Yeah, this is a problem. So, according to online sources, the story has been changed somewhat, where the characters were originally distrustful of the Rover. Except that was changed so that the Rover is revered as the savior from another world. Now, there's no way I can see what the old version looked like, but I know some people will think the Chosen One trope is generic and overused. I overall didn't really care for it as long as the character itself is good. In terms of the flow, I would say, well, not so good at first. there's massive info dumps that you can't skip for whatever reason, characters you meet that don't offer too much to the overall plot except for the sake of introducing new characters, and jargon that most won't care too much to know. You can have a lot of lore in the game, but that kind of info should be on a note or collectible somewhere. In a game like this, I think it's best to just give the player the basic premise, then release them into the wild to do whatever. Now, a trend I notice with the games I play is that it's fairly typical for a gacha game to have poor writing at the beginning, but get good later on. Genshin's story doesn't get good until Sumeru, FGO's story doesn't get good until Camelot, Snowbreak's story doesn't get good until after Chapter 11. It's not unusual for a gacha to start off slow or uninteresting and get better later, since, well, this is a fixable problem, given the live service nature of them. It just depends on how competent Kuro Games' writers are. Not to mention that the story, once you get past all the bloated dialogue in Acts 4 and 5, are pretty good, especially when this guy with the giant bulge shows up. I've completed all the main story acts so far, and I can indeed say it does get better later. What I did notice immediately were the character animations. The models don't look like clay dolls, they turn their heads, raise their eyebrows, and display expressive emotions with such fine detail, like the subtle shimmerings of the pupils, and some of these scenes clearly were designed with meticulous planning, playing off the lighting effects and the environmental backdrops. In terms of animation and texture quality, I think when it doesn't bug out, it genuinely looks pretty impressive. I don't think anyone would argue that the gameplay plays poorly. When it flows well, in addition to having a lock-on feature, you can pull off some pretty impressive moves. It's fast-paced and input-heavy, and I believe sets itself apart from the competition. Once I got to explore the overworld, again, I was surprised by the quality. It's hard to stomach that at the end of the day, these games are free to download. It's just that the standards for them have already been defined by an existing property that we have something to compare to. Wuthering Waves focuses on a darker side of world building. Side quests led me to some new locales and rewards, the puzzles feel personal and unique, and the scenery and music, again, pretty impressive. I know that the optimization leaves something to be desired, while I personally found some areas that stuttered a little bit, and I know performance has not been consistent with everyone across all platforms. Now, I don't want to defend Kuro Games here, because if a fully released game in 1.0 underperforms in terms of optimization, that should be called out. It's clear that Kuro Games still has some ways to go in this regard. So for the record, I don't think they deserve any defenses when it comes to releasing an unpolished and unoptimized product. As of currently, Genshin absolutely is still the winner here. I very rarely have stutters or performance issues while roaming in Teyvat, whereas here I can get the occasional dip here and there. I saw some discussion saying that Wuthering Waves is Genshin but worse, and I gotta say, I very much disagree with the sentiment. First, unlike Tower of Fantasy, Wuthering Waves never advertised itself as the Genshin killer or competing with Genshin. It's undeniable that there are many similar elements, such as the UI and overall aesthetics. But there are also some elements that fundamentally change itself from Genshin's systems. Let's start with the gacha. Wuthering Waves' 5-star rate is 0.8%, which is slightly higher than Genshin's 0.6%. This may not seem like a significant improvement, but when the rates are in the lower decimal digits, every bit of increase helps. Technically, you can argue that Wuthering Waves' SSR rate is 33% better. For every 3 5-stars you get in Genshin, you get 4 in Wuthering Waves. Something you'd see very often in gacha games is that usually the game will give you a free SSR in the beginner banner as a sort of a sweetener. Genshin is one of the few that doesn't do this. You get a free Noel, but you don't actually get a free 5-star. In the mileage shop, you can actually buy 2 additional copies of the standard SSRs and the limited rate-up one. Genshin doesn't have this. I've reviewed quite a number of gacha games on this channel, and something I've begun to see is more ways to limit break a character without pulling duplicates from the gacha, and I am all for it here. This means if you wanted to, you can skip pulling on a rerun banner but still be able to obtain any limit breaks, or sequences as they're known in this game, which is a pretty sizable change. In addition, for the weapon banner, there is no epitomized path. If you pull on the limited weapon banner, when you pull a 5-star, it is guaranteed to be the rate-up weapon, meaning the absolute worst case scenario is only 80 pulls, as opposed to Genshin's 240. Pretty big difference, wouldn't you say? On top of that, you can buy 7 of each of the limited, standard, and the limited weapon pull tokens from the shop monthly, while Genshin gives 5 of each for the standard and the limited character banners. I know this makes it seem like I'm biased towards Wuthering Waves gacha system, but I do think that Genshin's pull rates are still fair. There's a reason why it's used as the cornerstone of gacha design by other developers. Now let's talk about the open world design. For a game in version 1.0, the map is actually pretty large. I managed to traverse to the four corners of it, and there's quite a number of interesting locales to explore. I know some people believe that Genshin's open world design is better paced, but here's what I think. If you're going to compare Wuthering Waves' 1.0 world map, then it should be fair to compare it to Genshin's 1.0 map, which only contained the areas for Mondstadt and Liyue, and Dragonspine wasn't a thing yet. I think based on Kuro Games' previous game Punishing Grey Raven, since Wuthering Waves is their first major project with designing a 3D open world game, and just as MiHoYo were able to improve on the design over the course of 3 years, it's only fair to compare it to when Genshin was at its first steps too. So I generally play Genshin for the exploration elements. I enjoy going around the regions and taking in the scenery and the rewards. There's actually quite a number of side quests built up in my catalog. Same goes for the character stories and the hangout events. I normally don't play the game for these since I can't be sure if it's actually good or mediocre and filled with bloated dialogue. Even Wuthering Waves, when I got set loose to explore the world, I've never actually realized how smooth it was to have a skip button, because I can just do this and go straight back to exploring. I really don't understand the argument against having a skip button in a game like this. It gives players more choice, it respects the player's time, and if you want to engage in the story, you are free to do so. This is something that's always irked me with Genshin. Even if you force me to sit through the dialogue, I'm just spamming left click while watching a YouTube video on the side. Cause guess what? I wasn't gonna read it anyways. The music. Once again, I don't get this argument that Genshin's music is better. Now look, I'm no expert in music composition or music theory, but who are you to judge what is and isn't good quality music? Now I mainly listen to EDM or techno tracks from rhythm games, so OSTs like from the Yakuza series of games are right up my alley. And throughout the years I play Genshin, I think the music is beautifully composed and some of the boss tracks are pretty fire. I don't think a gacha game needs to have a good OST to be considered a good game. I care if the music fits the theme or the environment, which I believe is the case in Wuthering Waves. I don't think the music in this game is that spectacular too, but I don't think it needs to be. Music is one of the most subjective things ever. Personally, I can't stand hip-hop music, but if you enjoy it, I'm not gonna think poorly of you. If you prefer Genshin's music over Wuthering Waves, that's fine, and I totally understand. But if you don't have extensive music knowledge, implying that the music is objectively better is pretty moronic, in my opinion. I want to say these things because there are genuinely a lot of players having fun with the game right now. The subreddit for Wuthering Waves has already exceeded 100,000, making it on par with Nikkei's subreddit, which took 2 years to grow to this scale. The thing is that if the game is functioning properly, there's no reason for someone to post anything online. The majority of discussions occur when there is an issue brought up or when players are dissatisfied about something. What I'm trying to say with all this is that despite how much people doom posts about this game, whether you like it or not, Wuthering Waves will perform very well financially in the coming months. I know there's going to be a lot of people that are for or against Wuthering Waves succeeding, so here's what I think. Despite all the discussions online, something I think everyone should know is that the majority of players, at least in Western countries, don't follow any news or media outside the game itself. They don't follow the game's Twitter, news sites, Reddit, or YouTube content creators. They don't care about the discourse surrounding the game's optimization or story pacing. I'll quote this thread of tweets made by Josh Strife Hayes. When gaming news, especially negative news, comes out, and you wonder why the game is selling well or still being enjoyed despite all the stuff you think people should know or care about, it is an unfortunate but true fact that most people simply do not care. If the gameplay is fun, people will buy it and play it. The majority won't give a single thought to the politics, ethics, moral or immoral design choices, even the developer's personal history. In the land of popular gaming, gameplay alone is king. If the game runs and plays well, people will continue to play it. If not, they will simply move on to something else. The people that are engaging with these online discussion forums, including you watching this video right now, represents a minuscule percentage of the overall player base. We'll see how this plays out in the long term, but I predict that the game will perform very well in the first couple months. Kuro Games will easily be able to make back the amount of funds spent on marketing and development. The only thing is how well they can retain players through consistent 6-week content updates. If we take a look at their track record with Punishing Grey Raven, they have a good history of player feedback and overall generosity with in-game goodies. Here's hoping they can manage the game well here too. It's to a lot of people's personal beliefs that Kuro Games wanted to capitalize on the downtimes between Genshin's Natlan region, Zenless Zone Zero, and Azure Promilia, leading to a rush launch where a lot of players were not satisfied with the performance. That being said, I also wouldn't say it's a completely disastrous launch, and I really don't understand the superiority complex some people have with Genshin. Even if you have zero plans to play Wuthering Waves and don't care a single bit about it, this game succeeding will actually benefit you. Competition is good for consumers, it drives better service and products. MiHoYo just might treat players better when there is actual competition. If we take a look at the Wuthering Waves player numbers on online forums, Kuro Games will easily be able to make back the costs in the first couple months. It just depends on how well they can steer the ship from here on. When Punishing Grey Raven launched, it too had numerous issues that were fixed over the course of time afterwards, eventually reaching a state that most players were happy with. I'd like to believe they can do the same here too, but just to a wider scale. I think eventually, Wuthering Waves will stabilize and do well in terms of revenue. It's not going to reach Genshin's numbers, I don't even think it's going to come close. But I think it is enough to kick the hornet's nest a little bit. Wuthering Waves is like a small tumor to Genshin. MiHoYo knows that it's there and that the systems are slightly better, and it just might be enough to push them to give a bit more player appreciation. Anyways, that is my first impression of Wuthering Waves. Personally, I bought the $5 Welkin and the Battle Pass. I'll be sticking with the game for a bit further to see where it goes from here. And hey, maybe down the line, you can expect an atrocious gacha review on it. Thank you for tuning in, and as always, have fun out there.